Bueno, mira, cada vez que vengo a una función de bots o voy a una función de bots.
The name Julio César Chávez still echoes like a war drum. But behind the glory, a storm is brewing. At 62, the legendary champion faces a brutal reality that no fight ever prepared him for. His family's name is tangled in scandal, and the proud legacy he built is now overshadowed by headlines he never wanted. What exactly went so wrong? The fall of a hero is unfolding, and it's far from over. Legends are often frozen in time, but real life doesn't stop after the cheers fade. Everyone remembers the legend at his peak. However, if you look at where he is today, the story takes a turn no one saw coming. So, where is Julio César Chávez now? The answer might leave you speechless. The tragedy unfolding. The man who once stood on top of the boxing world and the pride of Mexico is now quietly living away from the roar of packed arenas. His name still echoes through the sport, but his reality today feels far from the legend people remember. Reports say his net worth is around $5 million. For someone who fought over 100 professional bouts and ruled the pay-per-view in the 80s and 90s, that number feels surprisingly modest. Other sources once claimed closer to $10 million, but the most recent reporting leans toward the lower side, suggesting that age, career gaps, and fading endorsements have chipped away at the fortune. This isn't the same Chávez who once filled stadiums, broke pay-per-view records, and walked through opponents like they were made of paper. Time has literally slowed him down. Well, it's not that Chávez has lost everything. He's still respected, still loved, but the spotlight that once followed him everywhere has started to fade. The cameras don't come around like they used to, and the headlines now focus more on what's happening around him, not with him. This is a hard pill to swallow for someone whose entire life was about being the main event. Back in his prime, there wasn't a man alive who didn't know the name Julio César Chávez. He was untouchable. He fought over 100 times, and for years, nobody could beat him. People lined up to see him fight because they knew they were watching greatness in real time. Now, his name pops up every once in a while, mostly when old highlights play or when his family name gets dragged into something new. However, there's no scandal tied to Chávez himself right now. What's happening to him is something quieter, but somehow even more painful. The hero who once stood in the brightest light now watches that same light shift to someone else. That's the real tragedy, because when your entire identity was built inside the ring, stepping out of it can feel like losing yourself. But he still makes appearances on TV, does commentary here and there, but those moments are rare. He's no longer the man promoters are chasing. Neither is he the face of boxing anymore. His earnings reflect that too. Those big paydays are gone. Now, he lives off smaller projects and his past fame. That $5 million net worth might seem like a lot, but it's a sharp drop from what it once was. And yet, this is only the surface. Because while Chávez tries to live quietly, the storm brewing around his family is about to pull him back into a spotlight he never wanted to see again. It's easy to talk about where someone ends up, but to really understand Chávez's story, you need to know how high he climbed before the world ever saw him fall. Before the scandals, before the silence, there was a time when Julio César Chávez was untouchable. We are not talking about hype or media spin. We are talking about real dominance. For 13 straight years, nobody could beat him. From 1980 through the mid-90s, fight after fight, Chávez walked into the ring and made legends look ordinary. He had about 113 professional bouts, held 6 world titles across 3 weight divisions, and defended his belts 27 times. Those numbers aren't just impressive, they're historic. There was this one fight, in 1993, where over 130,000 people packed into Estadio Azteca in Mexico City to watch him dismantle Greg Haugen. The event was a cultural highlight, and it showed how much Chávez meant to Mexico. He wasn't just a star, he was their champion, their symbol of pride, and their fighter. In a country where life can be tough, where many grew up with little and fought for every inch, Chávez was living proof that you could rise above it all. He wasn't born into fame. He came from a working-class family, struggled like everybody else, and fought his way into the spotlight with nothing but his fists and grit. This is why people connected with him. Every time he won, it felt personal. It was like every Mexican watching had won alongside him. Chávez wasn't a loudmouth or a showman. He let his fights do the talking. And when he fought, it wasn't only about titles, it was about respect. His victories over Hector Camacho, Meldrick Taylor, and Pernell Whitaker became more than boxing stories. They were moments of national pride. You couldn't ignore him. He was everywhere, including pay-per-view events, magazine covers, and the face of boxing. He literally earned every round. You see, Chávez had this relentless style. He'd walk you down, break your will, and never slow down. This is why he was not only respected, but idolized. Even today, walk through a boxing gym in Mexico, and you'll see his posters still hanging on the wall. His legacy is built into the sport itself. For years, Chávez wasn't an athlete. He was a national treasure. He carried the weight of a country's hopes every time he stepped into the ring, and somehow, he never seemed to buckle under it. But here's where the story twists. With someone that legendary, you expect the glow to last forever. Yet, as we see it now, Chávez isn't standing in that bright spotlight anymore. He is still popular, but not in the way it used to be. And this is the part that stings. How does a man who once filled stadiums now fade into the background? How does a career that lifted a nation start to feel distant? His fall isn't a scandal or some messy downfall. It's actually more than that. It seems like a hero who gave everything to the sport and now finds himself living in the shadow of his own legacy. The legend remains, but the world isn't watching like before. And now we're left asking the hard question, how did it come to this? How did the man who stood on top of the world find himself facing struggles that no championship belt can fix? This is where the story begins to change. Because while Chávez himself stayed true to who he was, the world around him didn't. And that shift, the slow unraveling of a hero's place in the spotlight, is what sets the stage for the heartbreak that follows. His fists built the Chávez legacy, but what happens when the weight of that name becomes too heavy for the next generation to carry? Curse of the Chávez name. For Julio César Chávez, the fight was always in the ring. That's where he built his name, where he became a symbol of pride. But the battles that would hurt the most didn't come with gloves or a referee. They came from his own bloodline. His son, Julio César Chávez Jr., grew up under the weight of his father's legend. From a young age, he was seen as the heir to a boxing empire. He had the name, the spotlight, and for a time, it seemed like he was ready to carry that torch. He won the WBC middleweight title in 2011, fought on big stages, and for a brief moment, people thought the Chávez legacy was safe in his hands. But it didn't last. In early July 2025, days after losing a high-profile fight against Jake Paul in California, Chávez Jr. was arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. At first, it looked like a simple visa issue because he had overstayed a B-2 tourist visa that expired in February 2024. But in reality, the situation was far worse. Mexican authorities had an active arrest warrant out for him, accusing him of being tied to organized crime and arms trafficking. the son of Mexico's most beloved boxer, now facing possible deportation and criminal charges linked to the Sinaloa cartel. It was a headline that shook not only the Chávez family, but an entire nation. For Chávez Sr., this wasn't just a legal nightmare, it was personal heartbreak. However, this fall didn't come out of nowhere. Junior's struggles had been visible for years. He battled with addiction, mental health issues, rehab stays, and a string of bizarre incidents that left fans and family deeply concerned. There were reports of pill overdoses, psychiatric interventions, and rumors about attempts to end it all. His father, who had once fought his own demons with substance abuse, could only watch as his son went down a path that looked all too familiar. This wasn't something Chávez Sr. had read about from afar. He had lived it. Let's rewind for a moment. Back in the mid-1990s, after years of dominating the sport, Chávez Sr. found himself drowning in the very things fame had handed him: endless money, luxury cars, private yachts. On the outside, he had everything a man could want, but on the inside, he felt hollow. I had it all: money, women, fame, cars, yachts, everything a man could want. But it didn't give my life meaning. I felt nothing. So what did I do? The most stupidest thing I could, Chávez once admitted. That emptiness became a breeding ground for addiction. It started with alcohol, then he upgraded to substance use. At first, he thought he could control it. He was Julio César Chávez. Nothing could beat him. But addiction doesn't play by your rules. Soon, the substance was controlling him. He began losing more than just fights. His first professional knockout loss came in 1994 against Frankie Randall. Fans thought it was a shock. But for Chávez, it was a sign of something deeper. He was exhausted, both in body and spirit. After that, the defeats piled up. His health began to fail. That's when the failures began. The defeats, he later confessed. In fact, the breaking point came in a hospital room where he was being treated for an ulcer and was heavily sedated. It was at this moment his son found him unconscious. Out of fear, Junior called emergency services. Chávez Sr. woke up in a rehab clinic, furious, ripping out his IVs, cursing at the doctors. But that anger couldn't change the reality. He had hit rock bottom. He stayed in that facility for nearly 6 months. It was in that quiet, away from the crowds and cameras, that Julio began to rebuild himself. Since then, he's been sober and clean. But the scars never fully heal. Instead of hiding them, he turned his pain into a mission. Chávez Sr. now owns and operates rehabilitation centers in Mexico, working directly with those battling addiction. In 2015, Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto even named him the country's anti-addiction ambassador. Chávez Sr. speaks openly about his journey, standing in front of recovering addicts and telling them, "I felt excited, happy, and proud. At the same time, I feel the pressure, the commitment. I really have to stay clean now." So watching his son spiral down that same destructive path was a much harder pill for him to swallow. He had lived through its worst scenes. Now, the same nightmare was unfolding again. Only this time, the man in danger was his own son. One incident that left a mark was when Junior's wife called emergency services after he reportedly consumed a dangerous number of pills. He was taken for psychiatric evaluation. His father publicly voiced deep fear for his son and worried that he might make a tragic mistake on the road or with his health. Chávez Sr. spoke about how painful it was that Junior's children are young and he wasn't able to fully enjoy them, and he feared what might happen if his son continued on that path. The Chávez name, once a source of pride, had become a burden. Every misstep by Junior became public news. His personal battles weren't private struggles anymore. They were stories for the world to dissect. Rehab wasn't a fresh start. It was another headline. His appearances in public often came with more whispers of concern than applause, and the legal troubles are far from over. Despite his defense team's efforts, Mexican prosecutors are still pressing hard. The threat of deportation hangs heavy over Junior as U.S. authorities process his removal. For the Chávez family, this isn't about losing a title or a fight. It's about a legacy unraveling in real time. Chávez Sr. now finds himself in the background, watching his son face battles that no amount of experience in the ring could prepare them for. Now we're left wondering, between legacy and scandal, hope and despair, how does a hero's name become a curse in the next generation? The Chávez name that used to stand for victory is now entangled in court cases, addiction struggles, and a public image that feels harder to fix as the day goes by. Family troubles are one thing, but when tragedy knocks on your door in the real world, far away from bright arenas, the fight becomes a lot more personal. For Julio César Chávez Sr., life has always been a fight. But no amount of training or titles could prepare him for the kind of blow that landed in 2017. It wasn't from an opponent in the ring, it came from his own front door. His older brother, Rafael Chávez González, was at home in Culiacán, a city where crime had long replaced any sense of peace. That night, 2 armed men broke in, demanding money. Rafael didn't give in. He resisted, maybe thinking he could out-tough them. But they didn't care. The intruders fired at him, and sadly, Rafael didn't survive the attack. Right there, in front of his family, his life ended. Rafael wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't living large. He was running a rehab center, helping hundreds of addicts find a way out. He was doing the work that doesn't make headlines, and yet, the violence found him anyway. When the news broke, Chávez Sr. wasn't silent. He demanded justice from authorities and pleaded for an end to violence and said, "Today it was my brother. Tomorrow it might be me." He wasn't talking as a boxing legend. He was talking as a man tired of watching his country drown in bloodshed. He called out the government, slammed the police, and said what many were too afraid to say. There was no protection for anyone anymore. It was a side of Chávez people hadn't seen. We knew him as the warrior, the champion, the man who could take a punch and keep moving forward. But this was different. You could hear it in his voice. This wasn't a punch he could roll with. This was a big loss. And yet, there was a cold reality in his words. When he said, "Tomorrow it might be me," it was a fact. In 2019, and according to ESPN Deportes, Chávez arrived in Mexico City with Jorge Peña, a member of his team, to participate in a show when a motorcycle rolled up on them. One of them pointed a pistol at Chávez's head and said nothing. In seconds, they ripped off his chain, grabbed his watch, and vanished into traffic. Chávez later said, "I had just been the victim of an assault. After a gun was put to my head, my watch was snatched, and my chain was taken from me, and Jorge, Peña, had his watch taken." There is no doubt that a life is lost in a second, describing the everyday reality of violence in a city he once thought safe. He had survived every opponent inside a boxing arena. Outside, that same confidence felt fragile. In his words, "The insecurity in Mexico City is enough to make you weep." And sadly, these weren't isolated incidents. Across Mexico, violence has exploded. Nationally, over 30,000 people die each year from homicide. In 2024 alone, the country recorded more than 30,500 murders, some of the highest totals in its history. the homicide rate climbed from around 15 per 100 in 2015 to over 23 per 100 a decade later. That is basically a 55% increase. Over the decade, more than 300,000 people were killed. It's no longer shocking, it's expected. And the thing is, cartels lead much of this violence. Places like Guanajuato and Colima have become battlefields where rival gangs fight for territory, leaving innocent families caught in the middle. In June 2025, a shooting at a local festival in Irapuato left 12 people dead. It was supposed to be a night of music and celebration. Instead, it turned into another wave of mourning as gunmen opened fire into a crowd. Even Mexico City, which once felt safer than the northern states, hasn't been spared. In early 2025, political aides were executed in the street, not in dark alleys, but right outside a metro station, in the middle of a workday. The killers disappeared into the crowd like shadows. For a moment, it felt like no one in power had any control over what was happening. But then, there have been efforts to pull the country back from the edge. President Claudia Sheinbaum has taken steps to handle the crisis. Homicides have dropped from nearly 87 murders per day in late 2024 to about 65 per day by February 2025. That's a 25% drop. It's progress, but when you're still burying over 30,000 people a year, it hardly feels like a victory. But with everything crumbling around them, the question now isn't about what has already happened, it's about what could still happen next. Since Julio César Chávez Jr.'s detainment, the spotlight has been relentless. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is pushing for his immediate deportation back to Mexico. There, a warrant is already waiting. The accusations are serious, and this is a criminal case that could redefine his life. What happens next depends on how Mexico's justice system decides to play this hand. They could press full charges, putting Chávez Jr. on trial for offenses that carry heavy prison sentences. His legal team is fighting back, claiming innocence, arguing that the evidence is flimsy, and suggesting the case might collapse under procedural errors. Whether that defense holds water in court remains to be seen. Mexico has a complicated track record when it comes to prosecuting public figures. Sometimes the system bends under pressure. Other times, it leans in hard, making examples out of the famous. So, will Junior find a legal exit ramp, or is prison a very real outcome? Right now, the future is uncertain. It could go either way. What is certain is that the next few months will decide whether Julio César Chávez Jr. finds a way back, or if this is the moment his story takes a permanent, painful turn. Do you think there's hope for the Chávez family? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share, and check out our channel for more updates.